everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Universal Church of Truth. This time, not talking about another Marvel show, even though there is one of those going on right now. Double dipping right back into Star Wars, picking up where we left off with Obi-Wan Kenobi a few months ago. I am one half of your host, Hunter.
And here's Joe. I'm back for the Star Wars.
Amazing. I love not saying anything and seeing how long it takes people to be like, "Oh, I should introduce myself."
Just test it out, test the water, see how long it
Test
takes.
the waters. It's fun. Um, yeah, I'm gonna start the way I always love to. Joe, you and I have not gotten the chance to like talk about Andor, um, pretty much at all. I feel like I actually don't really know what your thoughts on it are. So this conversation should be fun and enlightening for both of us. We got not one, not two, but three episodes released at once. I feel like that's the biggest episode drop I've seen from
I
Disney
think it
Plus
is, yeah.
that I can remember. They've done a couple like 2 episode premieres, but three feels big. But Joe, what were your thoughts? Give me your thoughts, feelings, just general opinions on the first 3 episodes of Andor. How you feel this show is kicking off its run, and what you didn't like. If you didn't like stuff, I don't mean to plant ideas in your brain, but likes, dislikes, go for it.
I mean, I haven't been shy about. I had some problems with the last two shows. Book of Boba Fett and Obi Wan had strengths, but they also had some weaknesses, in my opinion, from the structure. Andor, I really, when going in, I felt like it was that fresh breath of air that the Star Wars franchise needed for me. I love just the opening alone of the first episode having those Blade Runner vibes, and it just felt like its own corner of this galaxy, and it was really interesting because Rogue One is probably one of my favorite movies in the franchise, especially visually speaking. So I was very happy to see that they took cues from that film, but didn't devolve the entire identity around Rogue One, but rather just say we know what the direction was, we know the basis of this character. And it's funny how this time this is a legacy character to some degree, but it felt like you don't need to ever watch Rogue One to watch this show.
Yeah, I
And I
fully
think
agree with you.
that makes it stand out if you compare it to like Boba Fett, even The Mandalorian to some degree, and how it builds upon other franchises. But it felt like where The Mandalorian was early on, where it just was like this own unique corner before it started taking in elements of other projects. And it really felt interesting. And it was great that like when we looked at Cassian Andor, they took this direction that he is this character we know, but it felt like a new character. It felt like this was someone if we didn't know who he was before, we're learning about him and his past, and there's such an interesting way of how they handled that.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with basically everything you just said. Especially the part of I talked a lot. This came up when we were talking about Kenobi. I wrote a whole big article on it once upon a time. I think during the book of Boba Fett because I had been um you know fairly disappointed with how that show played out. Uh, what I call the Marvelification of Star Wars. And I don't mean that in a negative connotation towards Marvel, not at all.
Yeah.
I just mean that there are certain franchises that I think thrive with certain kinds of storytelling, and I think there are other franchises that do a lot better with their own kind of storytelling. Marvel, DC, these are film and TV franchises that are based on comic books. They're based
Yeah.
on the idea that these character stories overlap with each other and interlock and it's all connected and that's great and wonderful and Marvel does it so well and I love it. Um and that is not to say that Star Wars can't do that from time to time. It's always been fun to see how these things connect. After all, all these stories do take place in the same universe.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just when the Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, likely Ahsoka, likely whatever other shows are kind of in that bubble of Star Wars TV. as much fun as they are, at a certain point, to me, at the very least, they kind of stop feeling like Star Wars in the way that I love Star Wars, because it feels like they're trying to build this universe like it's a comic book universe
Yeah.
when it's not. Um, Star Wars has always, to me, felt like sort of, I want to say like an event based, but event like almost feels wrong, because I don't mean that there has to be like one thing every 10 years. It's just, I like Star Wars. I like when it tells individual stories.
Yeah.
I like when it has nods. I mean, and or right off the bat, you see like the alien hound police dogs from Solo, right? Like that's fun. That's great. I love to see stuff like that. But when you start advertising a show as being about Boba Fett, and then
Yeah.
you watch it and half of it is like a Mandalorian season 3, like that feels like you're taking the storytelling in the wrong direction. And Andor feels, it's hard to explain it, but Andor not only feels like it's not that and not going to be that, it feels like it resents that, like in and
Yeah.
of itself. I hate to keep using words with like negative connotations surrounding them, because I don't really mean it that way. But like Andor feels like a show that knows what it is, has a singular story to tell, and is
Yeah.
going to take its time to tell that story. And that is something that Star Wars has done before, but it feels like we haven't gotten from Star Wars in years. And I'm very excited to see it back.
It's the thing about Star Wars is that, I mean, there is the glove shit though meme thing going
Which
around.
that's fun. That's part of it. But
Yeah. And the thing is that what Andor does, and I think because you brought up Marvel, Marvel has at least the opportunity to tell stories based in a similar world, but still twist and turn it, even if the internet reacts the way it does. There's still like something unique about each project. I mean, pretty much Andor is closer to Moon Knight, and how Moon Knight was trying to tell its completely different story in its own little corner. But the thing about Andor, I think, which works in its favor a lot, is that this is a show mapped out over multiple seasons.
yeah,
And I think like I do think the Marvel shows are really high quality, and they're getting a little buried under different expectations. But the thing about what I think is Marvel's big problem as well at the Disney Plus shows, they're pretty much going at a show to show basis from one season to the next. And it just feels like, okay, are you setting up stuff for the show? Are you setting up stuff for your universe? And that becomes a bit of a burden for the project itself. But it's
right.
not, it doesn't undermine the quality of the project. It just undermines the way you view the project. Look at the Daredevil reactions of She-Hulk, for example. Andor was built to be a 5-season show. And that's a completely different experience. And you see that this is a show building upon its own story. This is not building up to Rogue One. This is building up to the story of Cassian Andor. And I think that's kind of its strength. And something I think Disney generally is learning slowly is that they need to make shows that are their own thing or build upon themselves, because you can't build a universe where everyone needs to kind of, because even like WandaVision going into Doctor Strange, you don't necessarily need to have watched it. All the pieces are there in the beginning of Doctor Strange to pick you up. But the thing is that some people have that feeling they have to do it. And with Cassian Andor, it's like you don't watch it for, oh, this is building up to Rogue One, because there is nothing really there that defines Cassian Andor to make Rogue One happen, because that's just his character. And we're
Right.
seeing a story about Andor that's never even touched upon in the original film.
Yeah, I actually think you just hit a really specific nail on the head. That I think you kind of just said what I was trying to say, but way better. And the point that you brought up that I really liked, um, when I say the Marvelification, right? It's exactly what you just said with like the Disney Plus shows. How like Marvel will tell its own individual stories, but at the end of the day, it's all part of this like
Yeah.
larger arc. Uh like if it's a book, each Disney Plus show, each movie, each thing is like a chapter in
Yeah.
in a bigger book, and because of that, it almost feels endless, which is intended with Marvel. Like they want it to feel endless, because to them it is like this endless sandbox of characters and concepts and whatnot. Um, where as with Star Wars has always been we have a story that we're telling, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
It was built with trilogies. So you see something in one movie, you know anything it's set up is going to get paid off. Like, you know there are two more movies coming with the payoff of whatever you saw in that first movie. um, and Andor feels like that. Like, we know for a fact they have the whole story mapped out. We know that there's a story they want to tell, and we know that it doesn't exist to just be part of this endless like
Yeah.
Mandalorian. Like, we don't know when it's gonna end, and we don't know like what in the Mandalorian is setting up different shows and what is setting up the next season of the
Yeah.
Mandalorian and all that sort of stuff. Whereas with Andor, this show, it's funny that that's refreshing now, but it is refreshing that Andor's like, I know that whatever is being set up in this season of television is either going to get paid off later this season or next season, because
Yeah.
that is like, I know where this is going. I know that they have a beginning, middle, end, and that's really exciting and nice and comforting in its own way. But let's hop into like stuff that actually happened in the show. It's 3 episodes worth of things, so that's, it's a lot of things. Um, but we learn, I feel like when you watch a show like Andor that's giving an origin story for, like you said, a character who kind of is a legacy character now. I mean, he's only existed since 2016, but I guess you would consider him a legacy
That's
character.
6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That time flies. When you're having time flies when the world is ending. But yeah, so we get to see his origin, and it almost made me realize, like, I feel like I thought I knew a decent
Yeah.
amount about Cassian Andor, and then this show happens, and I'm like, oh, we really knew like nothing about this guy. Um, and it's cool. We learn that he's born on a planet. We were introduced to a bunch of new planets in this. No
Yeah.
Tatooine. There is,
Thank God.
thank God. There is Kenari. There is Morlocks 1. I have these written down in my phone somewhere. Give me a second. Morlana 1. There you go, guys. I did see the episodes multiple times. Please forgive me. Kenari, Morlana 1, Ferrix, some other ones that I can't tell you guys about yet. But yeah. um, and they're cool. I mean, Kenari, what were your thoughts on Kenari and what we've seen of Cassian's origin thus far? I feel like this is going to be easier to talk about as the 3 episodes being like a singular plot as opposed to like breaking it up.
I will say one thing. Book of Boba Fett, this is how you do flashbacks. It was the first thing. I mean, I love the story they told with Boba Fett, even though it had some very cliched directions. But man, the pacing here feels so refreshing with those flashbacks bleeding in and out of the present time in that time. I was surprised when they went that direction. I think it's really interesting because it changes Cassian Andor's entire dynamic, and kind of adds that element to why he actually, is so rebellious, why he is trying to act up against this. And we see, I read something that I thought was a pretty good point, but because I think the his Marva was the name of of his mother, adoptive mother.
His adoptive mother, yeah.
We don't know what happened to his tribe. We just saw him destroy stuff. So for all we know, she thought she was saving him, thinking he's a savage. So they're playing around with the white savior trope in a way.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, especially because if you look at how the show opens, it's definitely going into what what is Star Wars about, and it doesn't shy away from the politics of this. This is about police reacting. There's a reason Cassian Andor, I mean, Diego Luna generally is a great actor, so also that cultural background adding to those sequences and his lived experiences in this is a show about that story and a man trying to go beyond that. And it's so interesting to see these like humble beginnings as him as Casa. And I was like, when the first episode ended, I was like, wait, what? That's him. There's more, and he's actually looking for his sister. So there's actually a motivation of why he's going out. This isn't the guy who just went like, I'm gonna rebel now. It's like, no, he's just doing it to find family. He's trying to find what is left of his heritage. And that's such a powerful message that I didn't expect in the show. I thought it was going to be mostly about, the rebellion, him rebelling. But no, this is a personal story tied into those events.
Yeah, well, and Star Wars works best when it is personal, and
Yeah.
I mean, Star Wars at its root has always been about family, whether it be found family, blood family, whatever that is, and I've always really loved that. But yeah, for me, the take that my version of what you just said is essentially I like that they are portraying Cassian as this character who it doesn't seem like his whole life like he has had a choice.
Yeah.
Like the things that happened to him on Kenari were not his choosing. He was, however you want to frame it, he was taken off of Kenari against his will. I mean, they literally sedated him and like took him.
Just took that down.
Yeah, taken off of Kenari against his will, and then brought to Ferrix and just living in the slum. It's not a rich planet. I mean, they're there like working scrap and all of that sort of stuff, and it just feels like he's been forced to do all of these things, and it will be interesting. This idea, it feels like him joining the rebellion and him saying, "Hey, I am choosing to fight. I am choosing to fight for the people I care about. I am choosing to do this." Like however they end up exploring that, and I hope they do explore that specifically, that aspect of it. um it's cool. I think it's cool to say like him being part of the rebellion is like the one thing in his life that he's really like, I have chosen to do this,
Yeah.
and I have full control over it. And everything that we've just talked about brings so much more context to that bit of dialogue in Rogue One where he says like, I've been in this fight since I was 6 years old.
Yeah.
And when you hear that in Rogue One, you just assume, yeah, he probably like his parents were maybe like rebellious and maybe they were killed and he was really angsty and yada yada. And now you see, no, he was literally 6 years old and against his will, like dragged into whatever the fight of the larger galaxy is. Um, and even just these first three episodes, if you go back and rewatch Rogue One, gives them so all of Cassian's scenes so much more meaning, and we don't even know how the heck we basically just got like the setup, because by the end of episode 3, it's like, okay, this is the show, now we're going. And like and so yeah, it is going to be cool to see how this plays out, I think.
I do thought what I find interesting about the show is that the pacing is very much I will say it's closer to like an HBO drama when it comes to its pacing. And it's ironic, especially now with the internet talking about how unique every show is from other platforms, and Disney shows are always the same. There are certain patterns you recognize if it's a show from Netflix, from HBO, HBO Max, and stuff like this. And this show distinctively has a slower, more personal pace to focus on that character structure. And it's interesting that it's hard to believe that they were planning 5 seasons of this, because I do think that could have gotten a little slow. Because
Yeah.
if each film was 1 year, it's like, okay, they're either going to have to fill that out quite a bit, or it's just like, how would they drag it out? But it has a comfortable pace, and it gets that tension when it needs to in episode 3. Like that's at the end, you definitely see that tension rise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I almost wonder if it was cut down because they realized like this, at a certain point we either have to add more action scenes that we
Mm.
don't want to add, or we're gonna have to do this, or maybe we were planning on spending like 3 episodes on this one problem and we realized we don't need 3 episodes on this one problem. Like there's a million different reasons. I will always find that interesting that they had announced this and planned this as like a 5 season show, and
Yeah.
they're like, actually it's gonna be 2 seasons now, and like season 1 is how we initially thought of it, and then season 2 is the other 4 seasons in one season, and you're like, oh, okay, cool.
A little nervous about that, not gonna lie.
Yeah. You're like, oh, all right, all right. But it does like it does give me hope that they haven't planned, like they already know what
Yeah.
they're doing with it, and they've had plenty of time to play around with it.
I mean, House of Dragon is also skipping many years from episode to
Yes.
episode, so this isn't an uncommon thing. It's just a pacing. You can make it work, and this is probably why the HBO comparison comes in. because even though like House of the Dragon skipped years, you still feel like you're in a certain timeline with each episode and just jumping to the next arc that is relevant to the story.
Right, and I'm actually kind of glad you brought that up. I did see someone, I don't remember who it was, so if this was you and you somehow see this video, please at me on Twitter. I'll credit you. But someone had this whole big long like Twitter thread where they were sort of talking about House of the Dragon and saying it was interesting storytelling and that House of the Dragon was doing time skips correctly in the sense that the show never makes the audience or makes itself feel like we need to see every day of every year. Like the show is saying certain moments over the course of several years tie together to become one story, and we're just like going through this life and taking a peek in when those moments happen, like when the story happens. We're not making a life into a story, we're just picking the story out of a life, and that works, and that keeps people interested, and no one really questions it. And it does feel like Andor might turn into that, where it's
Yeah.
like we're just looking at his life and they're picking out the moments that are the story, and that'll be really cool. But another thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about was we get lots of new characters on top of just Andor. We get gosh, I'm already forgetting. Is
Kyle
it
Soller?
Cyrell or is it Kyrell?
I
Or
think it's Cyril Karn.
Cyril Karn, that's the one. Yeah, Cyril Karn. He's our newest Star Wars baddie. Uh, he's he's real. Yeah, he's our newest Star Wars um guy who whines a lot, and as most of the Star Wars Imperial villains are. We get Bix, Adria Arjona, who I think one of my biggest surprise watching this show is I'm thinking most people leading up to the release of this
Mm.
assumed that her character was going to be Cassian's sister. I remember when she was cast, there was like this whole big thing where it was like, oh well, like it had leaked or maybe not leaked. Like someone had said that his sister played a role in this. I think Diego Luna might have said it in an interview or
Yeah.
something. And when they cast Adria Arjona, everyone was like, oh well, this obviously this is the sister because he said his sister is in the show. Um, and then it's not. It's sort of love interest. She may actually be my favorite of the new characters that were introduced, except for my Glupshido from these episodes. And we have Tim. We have everyone's favorite Tim. There's been like a weird amount of discourse about Tim online, which I was not expecting. When I saw the screeners for these, I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about that guy, and then I moved on. And then these episodes came out, and I opened up the internet, and everyone was like, we're gonna talk about Tim for 3 to 4 weeks, and it's like, all right, cool, that's that's fun.
Tim.
What about the other ones that are in it more? That's also cool. You mentioned Marva, his adoptive mother, Clem, his adoptive father, who it is referenced, is now deceased and was hanged in the street, which is a gosh darn shame.
Kind of dark.
Kind of dark, but something we did see in Obi-Wan Kenobi. So
Sure.
there's like another little connection. Um, yeah, we got all these fun new dudes. We got actually one of my other favorite characters, and I don't mean favorite as in I agree with anything he does or says, but I
Yeah.
just like watching the actor perform the role. Gosh, I wrote his name, Linus Mosk. That guy, terrible person, but really entertaining to watch.
The accent does it. I
The
think the
accent
accent
does it,
just does it.
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, so I was wondering of these characters. Then we're gonna eventually get into one of my other faves. Who is one of your favorites? Or talk about it. Also, um, Stellan Skarsgård is now in Star Wars, and we see a bit of him, and he's like he's like that cool guy who just rolls in the
Yeah.
nest and then does like says a whole bunch of cool stuff and does a whole bunch of cool stuff, and then you're like, we don't know much about you at all. This is crazy, and then the episode ends. So he's gonna be fun to watch too. But yes, please, Joe, take us there.
I think my favorite character is probably Arjona's Carlene. It was such an interest because, like, the thing is, at first I was uncertain where her character is or where they're going with it, and they kind of tease because she's kind of the one who's set up as the one having a connection with Starguard's character, Luthen Rail,
There's definitely more
and
going on there than we know.
that was interesting because I really didn't expect that to be the direction.
Definitely more than Tim knew, for sure.
Like that was, the thing is with Tim is that he had a suspect, he was focused on that suspect and didn't even realize.
Tim
But
is gonna
that
be
like
he's
that's
gonna
the
live
kind
in
of
Star
thing.
Wars infamy for the rest of days. No one likes Tim.
And he went out too in a way that's just like, oh,
Oh, it was so dumb. It was so dumb how he died. Not like how it was written, just his actions.
yeah.
And then he gets shot and he's dead, and Bix is like, oh no. And I was like, I mean, come on now, Bix. let's cool our jets on that one.
What was that sad? The thing is that it just kind of highlights the pretty much the story it's being told. It's about like this, especially with Cyril and him. Pretty much like technically, the entire story wouldn't take place if this one dude wasn't so focused on getting justice for these colleagues because his
Focused is a really
superior
nice
said just
word for it.
drop it.
Focused is a really nice word for it.
Kind word.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because this is kind of the story is about it doesn't shy away from the policing aspect of what the story is and the consequences because Tim pretty much was a character who's like, oh, something illegal's happening, the people should know, and he should get arrested for something terrible having happened, and having the suspects, and then more and more evidence kind of piling on, and he's like, oh, okay, and then he pretty much is, it's not too different from the Gestapo back in the day where you just couldn't trust the people closest to you, and it's not as heavy as that, but it's playing on those themes and him as the one who's actually the reason everything's going, that they got their suspect, etc., and him being pretty much thanked by being shot because he then went in and be like, wait a minute, you're not doing what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to get the other guy, leave her alone, and not understanding the consequences of those actions adds an interesting political direction of where this is and where the state, where the empire is at that point.
Yeah, it was very selective, like thinking, oh well, they're gonna get Cassian, but clearly my girlfriend, who is clearly collaborate. Like I'm sure she'll be fine. Like I'm sure they're just gonna arrest Cassian, and any co-conspirators it'll be all right. And like yeah, it is that like that ignorance of and I mean I could get into it of like the recurring theme of blind hatred in Star Wars and how that always backfires on whatever character is letting it fuel them. Granted, I understand his jealousy. He went about it all wrong though.
Yeah.
Not the way to do it. Anyone at home who's feeling jealous, don't be a Tim.
That's the new thing. It's like a
Don't be a
t-shirt
Tim.
line and or don't be a Tim.
You're gonna get your girlfriend Bix arrested, and then you're gonna get shot trying to save her, and it's just not worth it. It's not worth it. Talk it out. Have a conversation. Make some tea. Let her let her get her ex lover, her criminal ex lover, off the planet scotch free, and then you sit down and you have a fun evening and you talk about it, and you get the fun emo robot to involved, and
Hang out.
B2 emo is also great, I will say. I like that B2 emo needs to be charged to lie. I think that's really funny.
It was a great little
It's
idea.
a great little like personality trait that it and again, like just a wonderful little this show is just filled with like little things that if you really want to look deeper into, you totally can, but you also don't have to. But just the idea that like as humans, it does take so much more energy to lie than to tell the truth, and lying is a theme in Andor. I mean, he's literally about to become a spy. That's not a spoiler because we've seen Rogue One. So like, like
Huh.
this is like a whole thing. He's been lying this whole time, and I like that B2 emo is just like, yeah, I'll lie, but I'm gonna need to sleep for like 3 days first, and that's
I mean,
that's on
don't we
everybody,
all?
not on me. um, yeah, no, I like Bix. I'm excited to find out more about because I feel like with each episode there was more questions about Bix than there were answers. Um, there's clearly something special between her and Cassian, in the sense that even when B2 was like listing off all of Cassian's lovers or people that he's like casually told that he's from Kenari or whatever.
I
Um,
love that part. It's like I wouldn't tell anyone. Oh,
yeah, it's like listing it down, and then the second that B2 emo, which by the way totally throws Cassie under the bus because Marva's like, yeah, and there's a whole bunch I don't even know their names, and B2's just like Bix, and you're like, hey, shut up. I was like, damn, that's crazy.
Especially with the call from Cassian, and
I know.
just has a loudspeaker to beep that
B2 is
out.
trying his best, and he's consistently coming up just a little bit short, and that's okay because he's just tired, like the rest of us, and that's okay. Um, I forgot where I was going. Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's clearly something special in that, like, Cassian is overly protective of Bix, and
Yeah,
Bix is protective of Cassian, and she apparently has connections with people in the early stages of the rebellion, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on there that I'm very very curious about. Um, while I'm thinking of it, my one of my favorite characters in all three episodes of Andor, um, I believe his name was Vetch. He
hmm
is he was the guy that Nurchi paid as his enforcer when he went up to Cassian and was like, "You owe me money," and Cassian is like, "Now, like not now, like I'm in the middle of something," and he's like, "No, no, no," and then Vetch comes over and Cassian's like, "But
dude.
you listened? Like, did he pay you to be here?" Like, he's my favorite. Just the way that all plays out, and then right before it cuts away from that scene, he's like, "What?" He like doesn't know what he did wrong.
Just
I
standing.
did exactly what you asked me to do. I stood here. Um, yeah, he's my new favorite Star Wars character. So Vetch, you're king. Um, just want to
Great
make sure
design though too.
that. Um, maybe you caught it or understood it a little bit better than me, but uh, on Kenari, and I imagine this will be more important later. There seems to like they're living in like tribes or like small
Yeah,
villages or something along those lines. Um, but there are remnants of what looks like a huge mining operation or something. There's like terrace farming. It looks like, but it's not terrace farming and all that stuff. And there's clearly something going on Kenari. Um, did you catch anything I didn't catch, or is that still sort of a mystery? I mean, I know that there was stuff they found on the ship that was
yeah.
there, but in terms of like the actual resources of Kenari.
I think that they were hinting. The one scene I think I didn't like from Andor was when he was trying to get the shipment ready, or try to, and where he was talking to that one guy and who just starts going, "Oh, the guy they're looking for is from this country," and I heard that it was like this weird exposition line
Oh yeah,
where it
yeah.
just spelled everything out, and I'm like, okay, this was a little on the nose. But I do think that they're hinting that this was pretty much an ex mining facility, like a mining planet that's been pretty much robbed of its resources. But they somehow stayed quite secluded because they also show how they kind of just go out as a tribe. I don't. The thing that I'm a little curious about is where's the placement where Cassian left the planet? Because they made it seem like he was inside there destroying it as if he lost everything already before he was brought away. And I'm not, and because they don't show that, we don't know what happened to his
Yeah.
sister.
Well, and that goes back to Marva like assuming that everyone he know, like his whole family and his people are either already dead or
Yeah.
like about to die. But again, they like we didn't see the bodies. We saw one body. We didn't see the other bodies.
No.
So who's to say? I mean, whether Kanari is like a Kessel type planet, from Solo and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff, where it was at one point just sort of existed on the Empire's map as solely like a mining facility. I feel like that might come into play, like whatever resources they had
Yeah.
at some point in time. I mean, they made a really big point of that, like huge, beautiful shot of like the abandoned facility and the kids walking along the edge of it. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting questions being raised by this show, and I'm really excited for them to be answered.
It made me question one thing though. If this show will end with him finding his sister and if she's alive at all.
Right.
Because the thing is in Rogue One,
There's no
we all
sister.
know how his story ends.
Yeah, but there's
And
no
there's
sister, and he's quite the loner when we meet him in Rogue
yeah,
One. There's no Bix. There's no sister. There's no Marva. There's
got a
no
robot.
yeah, and it's not like at any point he stops and like sits Jin down and is like, "Hey, I got all these people at home. They're gonna miss me. I can't do this." Um, no, he's pretty much like, "Yeah, I'll die. That's fine." And you're like, "Okay." At a certain point, he's
Huh.
got to be K2SO. I'm excited to see how that plays out.
They could go two directions. Either everyone pretty much has a death flag over them just simply for him being in that movie, or they're gonna end the show with everyone he's met along his ride just looking at the explosion of the planet that he was on, just
yeah,
like, oh.
yeah. Well, Star Wars has actually a pretty good track record of going to like painstaking lengths to work around previously established things that they now are like have a different story going on. I think
Yeah.
it reminds me of how in Revenge of the Sith, Grievous mentions to Anakin that this is the first time they've met, and then later in the real world, George Lucas was like, "I want to make a TV show about the Clone Wars," and they're like, "Yeah, well, we already established that Anakin and Grievous have never met, so now for 7 seasons, we have to find a way for them to never come into contact with each other, ever." Someone
I
else on Twitter mentioned that in Rogue One, Cassian mentions that he's never been in a prison before. Like he's
yeah.
never been arrested. And they're like, so now for the all of Andor, they're gonna have to like find ways for him to keep avoiding prison, but like just barely. And it's gonna be fun. But it could be
I
something
guess
like
it's
that.
like right in front of the prison before he gets out.
Yeah. But it reminds me of like Ahsoka, right? When they first introduced Ahsoka, everyone's like, "Well, Ahsoka's not in Revenge of the Sith, so she dies." And everyone was just waiting for
Yeah.
years and years to be like, "Okay, how does Ahsoka die?" Um, and then they had to come up with like a pretty convoluted way around it, but they got there with like, well, we've instead of dying, she abandons the Jedi Order, and therefore she's not caught up in Order 66. And they're like, but she was caught up in Order 66. She just survived, and then it was like a whole thing. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if they found ways around it, but I do think that I would be surprised if every character in Cassian's life survives this show. I feel
This
like
is
they
the
gotta
show for that. On top
Marva
of
Marva's gonna die. Let's just be real with ourselves. Marva's not gonna. I feel like I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but I don't feel like Marva's making it. I can see them finding a way that like Bix doesn't die, but Bix just like has another way out there.
I
Um,
think Biggs is a character that we'll probably see again. It just
yeah,
that I think, I mean, it would be heavy, especially considering what happened to his adoptive father. If he comes back and just finds his mom hanging as well, like that would be dark as hell. Because
that
she's
would be hard
there.
to watch. Yeah.
They know she did it. So aren't they going to use her? Or that's kind of the thing. If they're just going to be like, oh, we're just going to leave her alone.
Yeah. No, that's gonna be tough. I hope that doesn't happen for my own sake, for my own mental health. I hope that does not happen. I mean, it could totally happen, but another thing I have written down here that is not Marva hanging in the street um is
I took a dark turn.
No, it's okay. It's a good point. It's a good part of what we do here is throw wild theories out into the wind. Um, I wrote drums cool, and you know what? I think that's a universal truth that will last forever.
Yeah.
And this is the universal church of truth. So let's talk about it. I didn't even plan that, guys. That just happened organically, and you're welcome. Anyway,
It's the symbols behind us. They just activate something.
but clouds open up, and God is like, "You did it. You can come." I'm like,
It's Charles coming from behind. Good job.
"Oh." Yeah, I like that Ferrex has this like drum culture, and they use drums to like signal things, and that pays off almost immediately in episode 3 during the big action escape sequence, where like the whole of the planet or town, city, whatever, bands together to be like, yeah, we're gonna play the drums and like spook these guys. And it was great. It was great. I loved it. It wasn't even drums, it was like a variety of percussive instruments.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was really, really cool and fun. Um, I was
It,
wondering what you thought about that. Actually, I was wondering what you thought in general about that whole, because episode 3 is kind of like a giant escape scene
yeah.
that lasts for like 40 minutes, which I was totally okay with. I really liked it. It's a payoff. These episodes work so well. I'm glad they released all 3 at once,
Yeah.
because I think that they work really well as like a beginning, middle, and end to like it's like a trilogy before the next trilogies.
Yeah.
you know. And this very much felt like episode 3 feels like the finale of the first Andor trilogy in a funny way. And it's exciting and it's cool, and Stellan Skarsgård is there, and we see that Linus Mosk is more of a man than Cyril Karn will ever be, and that's okay. That's okay. That guy popped a cantina and started chugging mid sniper session, and I respect it.
Went off. I think the interesting thing about the final episode is that, the pacing picks up because of the situation. And a lot of the show feels like it's you speak because we make the Game of Thrones comparison. Game of Thrones, the big draw of that franchise was that the story was a consequence of what happened before. It
Right.
felt less like a story being told, but more like consequences of people's actions leading to other consequences. And Andor has a similar trait. You just look at Tim's storyline, and like Cyril being this guy. Well, I have to do this, and he's just completely, underprepared. Didn't take anything into account. He just went in thinking, oh, we can easily walk through here and arrest, and it just did not work out in any way that he thought it
Right.
would, and the consequences of is actually lives being taken again. But then at the same time, it's just like Stellan Skarsgård isn't there for a story reason. He just was there because of this deal, and everything was building up to it. And just alone seeing Cassian run back for the thing that he technically didn't need because he was already told that I need you for something else anyway. But he was so fixated on that money because he wanted to get off planet. Who knows if there was more to this than what was being led on. He wanted to go with Biggs maybe, or take his mom off planet. We don't know, but that's kind of the thing where it adds that character moment of him making a mistake for maybe a reason we just don't know, but it still feels like in character.
Yeah. No, 110%. Um, the pacing. It's a good point with the pacing. That's sort of what I meant when I said like it pays off. Like it really picks up, and it feels like this is what is this is the end of this, and now we're jetting off to the next thing. I mean, the way that the episode ends is wonderful slow motion. It's dramatic. You bring up the character. I've been writing review. Check out my reviews for House of the Dragon. And I had Murphy's Multiverse, to be clear. That's the hat I'm wearing. In case you were wondering. And I read a lot of like what you just said about how like work shows based around just action, the action, it gets boring over time. But when that action is based on character development like that, it's so much more interesting. It's so much better, and I like it. I like it a lot. And that's why the early seasons of Game of Thrones, like you said, worked so well because yeah, you would have the Battle of the Bastards, but the Battle of the Bastards was only as cool as it was because we had like 5 seasons of build up to that moment, and like that made it worth it. Maybe Rogue One is going to be like Battle, like it's going to be one day like, yeah, now we have 2 seasons of build up to this movie, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of cool stuff. I kind of wanted to talk about some of the random Easter. So, like we said earlier, Andor is a pretty self-contained show, and I think that tracks in the sense that, I mean, even Kenobi, right? It felt like every episode it was like, oh, he dropped 4 names that were like Legends characters, and now we're gonna talk about that. And in Andor, there's not as much of that. I mean, there is some name dropping. We see, they have alien species from Rise of Skywalker pop up. They have alien species from the prequel trilogy pop up, and that's really cool to me. I like that a lot. Um, all the planets are new. At one point, our good pal Tim, he makes a reference to Wobani, which is another Rogue One reference. Actually, Wobani first appeared in Rogue One, and I'm pretty sure has only been in Rogue One in terms of like
I think
major
it's been,
projects.
yeah.
Um, but that is where the prison camp is that Jyn Erso is imprisoned, as one is at a prison camp, and where Cassian eventually meets up with Jyn. So that's cool hearing that, like, right out the gate in episode 1. In 5 years' time, Cassian will be on that planet, meeting the person he's gonna die hugging, and that's nice. Um, and that's nice. One of the legend things is Cassian's fake home planet that he's been saying for however many years of his life, that he's from, is Fest. Fest is not. Well, Fest is canon. Fest started as Legends, and is now canon. I believe there's like a Rebels HQ, or Rebels something that
Mm.
exists on Fest, but Fest has popped up here and there. There's a couple planets that they mentioned, or couple ships that they mentioned from like around the different time periods that, it's not necessarily worth digging into because it's just at that point be just listing names. But yeah, so I do think it's interesting that it's the show doesn't seem to be trying to not reference things, but it is cool that it feels like that original Star Wars where, yes, creatures that have been in other movies exist.
Yeah.
Planets that have been mentioned in other movies exist. But we're not going to great lengths to be like, and then Jyn went to this famous planet that you've seen in this show, and Knights of the Old Republic, and we're gonna have a whole speech, and then Yoda's Force Ghost shows up, and then, like, it's not that. It's very much like a self-contained story. Another thing I just thought of, I know I'm sort of rambling right now, but a point I would love to make is, how old is Diego Luna? Let's Google this right now.
Wait, I think I can get. Let's see. When was he born? He was born in 1979. He's 42.
Right. Cassian in this show, I'm pretty sure, is supposed to be like my age. This is a man in his 20s, and gosh darn it, I miss the gene pool because, wow, I do not look like that, and that's okay. Maybe when I'm 42. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that when Cassian died in Rogue One, he was supposed to be in his like late 20s to early 30s, and if this is 5 years before that, um, he's a youngin, and he's looking good for his age. Let me tell you.
We've come a long way from people in their 30s playing teenagers that look nothing like teenagers.
Yeah, we've moved on to people in their 40s playing 20-year-olds.
20-year-olds
Nothing like
somehow
20-year-olds.
look like 20-year-olds.
And it's fine. I get it. I get the behind the scenes reason. Like, no one cares. This is same friend, famously the Obi-Wan Kenobi like quick aging and all that stuff. It's never been too big of a deal. It makes me giggle watching. I was thinking about that. I was like, I'm pretty sure that when they did Rogue One, Cassian was supposed to be in his like late 20s. And if this is a prequel, but we're making this show 6 years later,
Huh.
Huh. Weird. They just like it'd be like if Sam Raimi was like, "I'm gonna make a Spider-Man prequel, and it's about Peter Parker before he became Spider-Man," and then he was like, "We're sticking with Toby though," and then, like
And we're not using de-aging or
not
anything,
using
just using
de-aging, it's
a little
Toby
bit of
now.
light touch up.
Like, look at this 15-year-old, and it's Toby Maguire now walks on stage.
Though to be fair, Tobey Maguire when he was playing a teenager didn't look like a teenager.
Well, to be fair, he wasn't. Tobey Maguire, I feel like, has always looked older. Not I don't mean this in an insulty way. I don't think he looks old, but he's always looked very mature for like his age. So even when he was in his mid 20s playing someone in their late teens, he still looked like a man in his early 30s, and that is okay. Oh boy. Um yeah, that got I was really sidetracked by that. Um is there anything else from, we're coming up on about an hour of recording. Is there anything else from these three episodes that really stood out to you, or was something that you were like, I really want to talk about this, or I have a Star Wars question, I don't know this thing. Hunter, you know a weird amount about Star Wars. What do you think?
There's no, no, sorry, my cat's trying to scratch something he's not supposed to scratch.
Video series has a long history of animals appearing.
There are special cameos. I think generally what I find interesting, and I think that's Andor's greatest strengths, is like a show like Obi-Wan has expectations in how the story is told. It has a lot of legacy behind it. You have the Legend series as well with how character developments are there. In this case, Cassian Andor, I think, works on its own merits because it has less of that weight going in.
Right.
And it's the thing is, I think that's what a lot of people are talking about in general right now is that with Star Wars, like Marvel is a universe, but a lot of stuff happens on Earth. Most of the big stories are on Earth. So you can kind of get away with characters interacting more often because you're always on the same planet with some characters in space potentially running into each other. In
Yeah, I
Star
think
Wars, you
there's
have a galaxy that is stretched out who knows how much, and somehow we always end up on the same planets. Somehow we have characters interacting every single time. Like even I think that's the strength of the first season of The Mandalorian, that it was like this self-contained story outside of the return to Tatooine, which at the time was more of a, that was a cool thing. But they started dragging it out by constantly going. And I think just if Andor came out before Obi-Wan, I think the Tatooine complaint might have been less because it was not like three shows after each other doing the same planet.
right.
But it leads to this limitation. And Andor, I feel like, has the opportunity to kind of go into its own direction and generally tell its own story. And I hope that they stick to it. I mean, we're getting legacy characters, we're getting Mon Mothma, we're getting Saw Gerrera, and this is something that's been officially announced. But I just hope people don't expect other characters to show up.
Yeah, there's a lot of theorizing of like, okay, well, this takes place around the same time as Fallen Order and the
Mm,
sequel, mainly the sequel, Survivor. That's the
yeah,
name. So there's a lot of people saying, oh well, it'd be like we're gonna see Andor bump into Cal Kestis, and like we're gonna see yada yada yada. The list goes on. It's possible. I'm not like it totally could happen, and if it does happen and it's done in like a tasteful way, I mean, Cal Kestis, I actually would like in the sense that I could see how they would bump into each other without like all of them are on Tatooine or something like that because they both have similar
yeah,
like galaxy spanning missions right now. Um, but yeah, that being said, like I think that most of the legacy characters who are going to be in this show like have been announced. Like we know Mon
yeah.
Mothma's in it. That makes sense because he knows Mon Mothma at the time of Rogue One. We know Saw Gerrera is going to be in it. That makes sense because Saw Gerrera is in Rogue One. Like all of that stuff. But yeah, like the point, it's a good point you make that with Marvel, like it mostly takes place on Earth, and So a lot of the events take place around like Earth's cultural hubs, like in
Yeah.
New York City, or being a big one. You know, that's where a lot of you have a story that takes place in the United States. There's a really good chance that someone's attacking New York City, like something along those lines. So it makes sense. But yeah, I've always had that problem with modern Star Wars. And again, I like this being like the end of our episode because I feel like we've come full circle. And that again is what I mean. Where like the Marvelification of Star Wars, where like with Marvel, it's always made sense for these characters to bump into each other, and with Star Wars, it's like there's so many, and it doesn't even need to be. I don't even love the idea that they invent like three new planets for every project because at a certain point I'm like, how many planets are in this galaxy, and how many of them are like have we not heard about for this long? And that's a separate. It's not really a complaint. I like sort of laugh about that. It's more along the lines of like you said, like Tatooine is cool and it's famous in the real world and it's iconic, but in the context of the universe it very much is like the whole point of Tatooine in the original Star Wars movie was that it's in the middle of nowhere and no one cares
Yeah.
about it. That was like the whole point. And I understand like, you know, in the Skywalker saga, the story reasons to go back to Tatooine. I understand, yes, it can be cool like in the first season of The Mandalorian. I feel like that was done well where they were like, yeah, we're going to hop into Tatooine for an episode. The characters don't know why that's important, but this episode does and it's
Yeah.
fun. Um but at a certain point, it's like, yeah, why is it the same three or four planets? Why are we not going elsewhere? And for me, it doesn't even need to be new planets completely. Like, Rebels introduced a ton of new planets. It would be cool to see some of those planets that we know canonically exist in Star Wars in live action and say, like, yeah, more than just this one thing happened on this planet. Or even movies from the film trilogies that we saw in one film and have never seen again, like they would be cool to go back to those planets. I mean, there are certain planets that it does make sense for characters to bump into all the time, like Coruscant is literally like the capital, right? So it makes sense, the capital planet on the inner rim, that like that would show up here and there. It was almost weird that it didn't show up in the sequel trilogy. I mean, we know now why it didn't, but like that one makes sense.
Yeah.
Tatooine makes less sense because it's in the middle of nowhere, and especially when you say, yeah, there are like 800 different planets that are all in that outer rim, middle of nowhere. It's like, why are they all on Tatooine? There's like supposedly so many planets that serve the same function. Um, but yeah, I agree with you. All that to say, I agree with you.
I'll just add that I think what they could do, and I think that's something worth exploring, is that most of the times if you visit a planet, it's the same biome, and it creates this vision of if a planet is a desert, has a desert, the whole planet's a desert. And I think if they start exploring, these different environments, or even, go back to a planet in a completely different weather pattern, like let's go to a forest, the forest from I can't remember the planet now from Return of the Jedi.
Andor.
Andor, thank you. I couldn't
Yeah.
remember it.
You're
Those
good.
famous ones. I can't think of the name. Like, what would that be if it's a snowy time and we're seeing the consequences of the Empire, for example, changing climates through their mining activities and stuff like that? That would be something interesting to explore because it feels new and fresh, even
Right.
though it's something familiar.
And they've done stuff like that before, but it's usually been in like the comics
Yeah.
or books or like a video game where they're like, yeah, this planet used to be like a forest planet. Well, Tatooine. I know we've been talking about it a million times, but I'm pretty sure Tatooine's whole thing is that millennia beforehand it was a water planet and then it dried up and now it's a desert planet. So like we know that that is possible in the galaxy. So yeah, like it would be really cool, or even it would be cool to say like, yeah, everything went down on. Now I'm blanking on one of the popular ones. This is because you blanked and now I'm blanking. The clone home planet. Oh, it's a water planet. It's another water planet.
Uh,
Oh, this is so embarrassing. I've watched like
Kamino.
eight. Was
Camino.
Camino. Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh wow, that was. I'm so sorry, guys. That was a real lapse in my
see now
knowledge.
I got my chance to.
I know, and you know what's crazy is I thought about Camino earlier in this episode and ended up not talking about my point. And I, in my head, like I said, Camino 800 times, and then I forgot about it. Yeah, it would be cool to be like, okay, after everything that happened on Camino, like it's not a water planet anymore, and there's something else going on, or something like that.
If
Yeah,
they ever get a chance to do like a High Republic era, and they're on a
yeah,
water planet, and we still tell that story, that would be an amazing twist. Like at the end of the show, to be like, oh, let's leave Tatooine behind. It's not a twist in any way, but it's just like a sideline where you go, wait, 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 what? And
yeah.
then that would be an interesting because it feels like this is a galaxy that lives and changes.
The Acolyte. That's gonna be our. The Acolyte will be the first live action Star Wars thing in the era of the High Republic. So keep your eyes peeled, folks. We could get some stuff. Wouldn't be the first time something mentioned on the Universal Church of Truth turned out to be, wait for it, true. So, you know, Joe, is there anything else that you would like to discuss specifically from Andor? I mean, like I said, we could dive into like the minuscule Easter eggs and random alien appearances and all of that stuff, but I feel like we've covered a lot of the broad strokes. Is
Yeah.
there anything else you'd like to talk about before we dip out of here?
I think I'm excited for the future. I'm excited to see where the show goes. I'm really curious if it really is going to go like a 3 season arc, like each season, each 3 episodes is could have been its own film. I'm generally curious where they're going to go with Andor and his character. If the he starts questioning his direction. Should he look for his sister? Should he help the rebellion because he finds a new home that is his choice? I'm excited. I'm really excited to see where the show goes, and I have to say that it's after everything with Obi-Wan and some mixed feelings. I'm really optimistic about the show. So this is an exciting jump in back into the galaxy far, far away.
Yeah, I agree. My final parting words will be that will be yes. And then also Tony Gilroy excites me because nothing excites me more for a project than when the creative behind it publicly and unabashedly is like, I do not give a single crap about this franchise. I just had a cool story I wanted to tell. And I'm like, this is going to be the best because you're not trying to please anyone. You just have your story and you want to tell your story. And like, that's great. I think that where shows like Kenobi, which I did love Kenobi. I like
Yeah,
Kenobi a
same.
lot more than Book of Boba Fett and all that stuff. Um, I do think it's good to keep fans in mind. Like I don't think it's inherently bad to want to please fans and to keep them in mind and say, hey, I know you love this. We're gonna try to do more of this. I don't think that's inherently bad, and I don't think that like John Favreau, I don't think that Dave Filoni, when they do those things, I don't think they mean anything negative by it. But it's refreshing to hear someone behind a Star Wars project be like, "Screw you guys, I know what I want to do and I'm gonna do it," and it makes me feel like a lot of the issues that I had with the previous shows are gonna be non-existent because there's no way they could happen when the creative himself was like, "What's a Star Wars? I'm telling this, I'm doing this." I'm like, that's the bestest.
It's
Can't believe.
ironic how I feel and what I think is the strength of Phase 4 of Marvel right now is that they're telling stories that are like, okay, we know the core characters, we know the core strengths, but I want to tell a story that fits the narrative that I want to do. I mean, Taika Waititi's infamous for pretty much making fun of having no ideas about comics or anything, even though he openly has confirmed he reads them and then pretends he doesn't care and oh, I want to
Yeah,
piss
I
off
mean,
fans and stuff like
you
that.
couldn't make you couldn't make we're not bringing Thor: Love and Thunder discourse into this, but however you feel that how he handled
Yeah.
the arcs, the like the goofiness of that movie could not someone who has never read a comic couldn't do
Yeah.
that. You know? But yeah.
But it just plays into this right now things of being accurate to something, being true to it or just not caring at all and trying to tell your own story. We're seeing more creative spaces enter these areas that have an understanding, a base understanding of what it requires, but want to tell their own story with those characters. I mean, even The Boys is very far departure from the comics, and it takes the core principles, it takes characters from it, but tells a very distinctively different story with a much more different edge than that had. And we're seeing that more and more with adaptations as of late. Sometimes you get something like Invincible, which is very much a one-to-one adaptation, but sometimes animation is easier to do that because the medium is more flexible in that regard. And in live action, being able to just to tell a story the way you want to do with the limitations of that medium has its own benefits at the end of the day. But of course, some fans want certain things, and that's just how things are nowadays.
Yeah. Social media was a game changer for storytelling in the sense that creatives have a more direct line to knowing what people want to see, and I can't help but feel like that affects how they tell stories. Let me tell you, Tony Gilroy doesn't seem like a Twitter guy. That's great.
Not a single bit. I think he has no idea what's happening. He's just like, I got the show out.
Yeah, and that's the best. So this is now a Tony Gilroy stan. We stand him. We stand Vetch. I still am not 100% sure that's his name. I still stand the dinosaur bounty hunter from Obi-Wan Kenobi. I will say that I still love that. I don't know the gender, but still stand them, and it's the best. So with that, I will bid y'all adieu. See, that was not fancy and then fancy, mixing it up. You never know what you're gonna get from me. Um, I have been one half of your host, Hunter.
I was the other half, Joe.
Got it a little quicker this time. By the end of this 12 episode run, we're gonna be it's there's gonna be no pause, none at all. Um, yeah, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next week.